MarketNews.com. I'm John St. George. My guest, Edward Griffin. Mr. Griffin is the author of the book Creature from Jekyll Island, plus many others. So you've been saying to yourself, the government's a mess in one way or another. How do these messes start? Where do they come from? Earlier we've been talking about collectivism. Mr. Griffin gave us some definitions of what that is. And then two tentacles form out and form something equally as ugly throughout history. Leninism and Fabianism. And we're going to find out what these two things were, and are they still around today? Ed Griffin, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, John.
I think just to kind of back up a little bit, give us another definition of collectivism, then I want to get into Leninism and Fabianism.
Right. These are strange words to our ears in modern times. Collectivism is a word that was used quite freely in books of a few decades ago, but it's a word that's been lost to us today. Roughly defined, it is the concept that government is the solution, the proper solution for most of man's problems. So a collectivist, and this is not a technical definition, but it's a pretty good substitute. A collectivist is a person who believes that if you have a problem and you want to improve society in any way, that the solution should be through government action, through coercion, using laws to bring these things about, and if necessary to sacrifice individuals or minorities, if necessary, for the greater good of society. And you find this philosophy embedded in some of the rather dreaded philosophies or tyrannies of our recent history, like communism and Nazism and fascism, are all based on these principles of sacrificing individuals, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. And of course that always translates into the greater good of the state. The state is presumed to be the greater number of society. So that's basically what we're talking about, collectivism. And what many people don't realize is that collectivism exists today in two forms. And here are some more words that are not very well known. Now, Leninism is fairly well known because we remember the name of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who was one of the firebrands of the Bolshevik Revolution and quite a prolific writer and a theoretician. Lenin took the theories of Karl Marx and converted them into a living fighting force. See, Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, and there are millions of Marxists around the world who have read his works and believe his theories. Basically his theories were: workers of the world, unite, throw off the chains of your capitalist exploiters, recapture control of the means of production, unite against war and racism, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and on and on and on. These are very famous and popular slogans that Marxists in general like. They buy into this, and because they're basically idealistic people, they think that would be a better society than we have now. But the fact of the matter is that all of the countries historically that have been taken over by communism, that we used to say behind the Iron Curtain, none of those countries were ever taken by Marxists. They were all taken by another group called Leninists, or Marxist-Leninists, sometimes they call themselves that. And those are people who also believe in the writings of Karl Marx, but they believe in the writings of Lenin, who organized the Communist Party, who said basically we must have organization, we must have structure, we must have discipline, we must have communications, we must have training, we must have leadership. He created a fighting force. And so that is the fighting force that took over all of these countries. So Leninists are a notch above Marxists.
They sound like they were more doers.
They were doers, exactly. The Marxists tend to be the theoreticians. The Leninists are the doers, the ones that go out and make it happen. See? So there's a very important distinction between the two, and it's interesting, I think, to know that even in the heyday of communism, most of the top communists did not refer to themselves as communists. They referred to themselves as Leninists.
Interesting.
It's very interesting, and it's very significant, because the word communism was kind of a catch-all phrase. Lenin and Marx both taught that communism was something for the future. They were establishing what they called socialist republics.
It's like a Christian saying, I'm a Calvinist. You know, that's another, I'm going to subscribe to a theology as opposed to the primary foundation.
Yeah, they were working toward the future. Communism would happen, they said, when finally mankind was perfected and the state would wither away. Ha ha. Yeah, we saw a lot of that happening, didn't we? But anyway, that was the theory. In the meantime, what they were building was socialism, they said, and those people called themselves Leninists. So when it came time for the crumbling of the communist empire, so-called, all these people did was take off their hats that said communist, put that down, and put another hat on that said social democrat. But you notice that the heads underneath the hats didn't change. And their ideas didn't really change. They talked about open markets and being friendly to the West and all these sort of things, freedom of speech. They gave a lot of verbiage to that. But, and some of that actually happened. But underneath, the police state didn't change. They still maintain a very strong military, and they're still preparing for international war. The KGB changed its name, but it didn't change. It just got bigger and better funded and so forth. Nothing really changed except the label. And it's interesting to note that this is one of the basic strategies of Lenin. Lenin was quite a strategist. For example, he said, comrades, it makes no difference what you think or what you know, how many books you've read, how good a debater you are, how smart you are. None of that is important. All that matters, he said, is to come to power. You must come to power. Now, once you do that, then you can afford debate, because if you have the power, you can shoot anybody who disagrees with you. He actually said that. He's quite a guy. He said, you know, promises are like pie crusts made to be broken. So he was a strategist, and he considered that he and his followers were at war with the rest of the world, and they were going to conquer the rest of the world.
How different do you think he is from Saddam Hussein?
Well, not an awful lot different at all, no.
He's a thug.
He's a thug, but he was probably smarter than Hussein, and he developed a world following, and he had much better strategies, and of course he had better funding and all that sort of thing.
Interesting that he's focusing on power, and as you were talking, I'm seeing, well, here we have a philosophy trying to create a level playing field. You know, it doesn't matter what you know, it doesn't matter what that, you know, all the good for the state, and we're going to break down the different classes. Is that something he was a devotee of as well, or was he just more...
No, what you're talking about there is more of a Marxist theology. See,
the theory guy.
The theory guy, yeah, that's right. Theory guy. Lenin basically said none of that makes any difference. That you use it if necessary to get followers or to make it sound like what you're doing is noble. But the only thing that matters, he said, is to come to power. And I'll give you an example. He said, for example, if you were to go into a country that we're trying to take over, and those people had a strong culture, strong nationalistic feelings, they didn't want to give up their history and their nationalism. So what do you do, comrades? Do you go in there and tell them that that's stupid? Do you go in and preach internationalism that we know is the way of the future? He said, no, of course not, because they would reject you. You go in and tell them what they want to hear. Be the best nationalist leader there. Let them follow you, thinking you represent them, so that you can come to power. Once you're in power, he said, then you can betray them, because you've got the power. See what I'm saying? And Lenin said, you go into a country where they don't like us communists very much. What do? Go and say, we are a communist? No, don't be stupid, comrade. You go in and tell them that you're a non-communist, or better yet, tell them you're an anti-communist. Form anti-communist organizations and lead your own opposition so that you will not be defeated. Put up a good show, he said. Make it look good. Actually do some really effective things now and then, but always control your own opposition so that you can come to power.
So Leninism is a form of tweaked communism with a goal that is of a detriment to the fellow man because you want to go for power.
Well, communism doesn't really exist as such. It's something you can't define. But Leninism, you can. And the point I'm trying to make is I'm getting slowly to it here because we're going to talk about Leninism versus Fabianism.
I'm doing what comes first, the chicken or the egg thing.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, it's hard to define. But you see, one of the theories that Lenin taught was the strategy of a feigned defeat or feigned retreat in order to lure your enemy into a vulnerable position. Now, this is not original with him. You can find this in the history books. I discovered that strategy brilliantly taught by Tamerlane, the Mughal warrior. He would when he was confronting a superior military force, he couldn't defeat them one-on-one in the open battle. So what he would do is just before nightfall, because they never fought at night, they always fought in the morning when the sun came up, he would make it look like his forces were retreating. He would put his forces, first of all, in a very vulnerable location where they couldn't defend themselves very well. It looked like it was a stupid act, And the enemy would say, look at that idiot, he put himself into a vulnerable position. We'll get him in the morning.
Another definition of collectivism, then I want to get into Leninism and Fabianism.
Right. These are strange words to our ears in modern times. Collectivism is a word that was used quite freely in books of a few decades ago, but it's a word that's been lost to us today. Roughly defined, it is the concept that
MarketNews.com. I'm John St. George. My guest, Edward Griffin. Mr. Griffin is the author of the book Creature from Jekyll Island, plus many others. So you've been saying to yourself, the government's a mess in one way or another. How do these messes start? Where do they come from? Earlier we've been talking about collectivism. Mr. Griffin gave us some
things about, and if necessary to sacrifice individuals or minorities, if necessary for the greater good of society. And you find this philosophy embedded in some of the rather dreaded philosophies or tyrannies of our recent history, like communism and Nazism and fascism, are all based on these principles of sacrificing individuals. The government is the solution, the proper solution for most of man's problems. So a collectivist, and this is not a technical definition, but it's a pretty good substitute. A collectivist is a person who believes that if you have a problem and you want to improve society in any way, that the solution should be through government action, through coercion, using laws to bring these things.
Definitions of what that is. And then two tentacles form out and form something equally as ugly throughout history, Leninism and Fabianism. And we're going to find out what these two things were, and are they still around today? Ed Griffin, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, John.
I think just to kind of back up a little bit, give us an